All right. Thank you, and everyone, for joining the IOV Foundation New York, episode 158. For all those who get to come and listen to this information in the future, I hope this is a great prospect in the form of an audio file for what our societal means at the time of Western civilization in an effort to produce the greatest resemblance through words to describe the system, of course, that we have today. And yeah, hopefully, it could be looked back at from some sort of historical kind of means of text. So welcome everyone to the space, though. Vet, Shellfish, Vet, you joined so quickly. Chris, Dazzling, and Crypto Queen M. Feel free, guys, if you guys want to come up. This is more of an open forum, although I couldn't fit that in the title because it only gives you so many characters. And with that being said, the open forum is more talking about the sociological means of society's formation of the way that we think of voting, choice, one side or the other. And so just going to talk about that concept. Maybe, you could even go into the game theory of it if anybody wants to specifically think of the game theory aspect. And yeah, and that why it's the way it is, and possibly how other networks of systems could do the same type of job interactions and produce the same results, but with a different form of interaction. So I think that would be cool if we bring that up as well. Anyway, well, welcome up, Daz.
Jam, how we doing?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well myself today. I'm just eating right now, so excuse me if I'm
Nice.
silent for a second or two here and
No,
there.
no, you're good. You're good. I'm actually kind of excited about today. uh, I remember back in 2016, I was watching the election play out then, and I'm, God, if I'd have told myself 15 years ago I'd be into politics, I'd just say no, that would never happen. Uh, but yeah, I remember watching Trump come through, and I thought I didn't think that he was going to win in any way, shape, or form, and then he just surprised everybody, I think, and came through. And yeah, just kind of been watching it all play out over the last 8 years, but I think he's got a pretty good chance. And I'm kind of, if I was an American, I would vote Trump, but I'm not. So I watch it from afar, and it's very interesting to watch it all play out. It's interesting that you said then about how we could grab the concepts of voting and then bring it over into other forms. Because when I look at how the XRPL works and other blockchains as well, it works on a very similar principle. I mean, you've got these DAOs and you've got governance structures, and you've got validators, and the way that it all plays out, it's very reminiscent of how the political system plays out. So I thought I was kind of getting into technology and blockchain, but I think that I'm getting into politics as well. So it's fun, and I'm loving every single moment of it. Vet Shellfish, what's up?
Yeah, you're very right. And of course, today is election day. We may not see the results happen tonight. We may find out at a later date. But especially with things like PA's, voting machines, a quarter of their states' voting machines are down and have been down for half of the day already. So, there are probably a lot of other issues and things that we're seeing pop up, which states have already warned up to 14 days possibly for their state to be able to cast all the ballots. Nonetheless, and I won't necessarily know. I didn't really plan on commenting specifically about this specific election. Of course, the election is today, and it's what prompted the thought of talking about, voting. And we don't live in a popular vote society, right? To begin with, votes are more in kin with the description of the voice of the individual representing themselves publicly. We live in an electoral college system, right? And so the electoral college essentially makes the decision at the end of the day, whoever those elected officials have been, and that is what determines uh, who would be the sitting president. Although, right, I may be of the opinion that I don't think it necessarily matters in particular of who may be sitting there, the representation of actions will be the same set of representations of actions from the end standpoint, the the results. However, I think how things go about is, of course, different individuals themselves. So each one of us speak differently and go about things differently. So I think, take that into account for every situation. But yeah, Vet, Shellfish, you guys are both came up. Vet, what are you thinking? Have you been enjoying all the election conversations so far tonight?
Yeah, I've been following so far in spaces and looking around what I can find. Part, of course, from the official or I guess traditional news outlets like CNN and so on, or MSNBC. But yes, so far, I mean, so far I would say it's if you look even like very controversial is the prediction markets. A lot of people bring them up also in spaces. They follow the prediction markets, poly market, and so on, which is heavily it's a crypto app essentially, and it's crazy that a lot of people who are outside of crypto are talking about it because it facilitates such an accurate way of knowing what the market is thinking, where they're putting their bets. And I was just in a space where people were comparing data, and 77% more accurate than so 77% accuracy for a prediction market and 70% for polls. So just 10% difference, but it was an interesting debate, and it was just one of these moments where crypto features break through, you know, I guess mainstream media, and people don't know this is actually it's a crypto product that people are using, like Polymarket. They made 3 billion in volume, dollars in volume. So yeah, it's heavily used, and so we will see. We will see where this is going.
I know the
From
funniest
there.
part
Yeah.
about that is that Americans technically can't even use the platform, and so this is like all voting that's being done with people from the United States.
Yeah, the multiple platforms. The polling market is for outside, and there's Predictis or something like this. This is only for only Americans, actually. So it's weird because there's no intersection, right? You're either outside or in America. Um, but yeah, you're right. That's actually really interesting. The cool thing that they were talking about, and I didn't think about it too much, but it makes total sense with a poll, right? You get like certain questions, and as you get a question and certain answers that you can do, or just one question, one answer, and so it's very tailored. But with prediction market, you have a way to put information that is outside of this to work, right? Let's imagine you know some alpha or whatever, right? If you know some alpha, you buy, right? Let's say if you would have any alpha, let's say this state is probably gonna vote more like this, or that the whole county is gonna vote like that, and you can leverage that by buying, signaling this with buying these shares, which you couldn't do in a poll, right? Because how would you express that in a poll? The poll is, as a question answer. So I find this interesting that you can put all information essentially in these prediction markets that are outside of the polls, by people who have alpha, by people who may be experts, very good in whatever. So yeah, prediction markets.
Go ahead, Dazzling, jump in.
Sorry. Was that in Marina Fall space that he was talking about? He just kept kind of shilling that up, Vet? Because I was having a listen in there for a little bit
Yeah,
too.
Mario and the other one. Who was that? I forget the name. I think
Uh,
it's a friend of him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was interesting when I was talking to Chip and Jeff at the Gold Coast because they were telling us they were trying to on their podcast. They were saying about they weren't sure if John Deaton could take donations from outside the US, but I asked them that there, and they end up finding out that they can't. So it's kind of it's interesting, but it's good that you can't have that outside influence coming into influence the votes. I guess it is kind of a closed house system in the US, and so it should be because this is your election, not ours. But I was going to say something else, but I totally forgot. So Carry on.
The prediction market is different, right? This has nothing to do with the actual vote. It's just literally everyone who can vote or cannot vote giving opinions on who they think is going to win. And this can be all sort of information that they put to work. And the big difference here is that people put actual money onto place. Like we talked about $3 billion in volume. This is actual dollars people put in, and they're willing to lose or win. And this is interesting because typically, in capitalistic society, you say the market knows, right? If let's say price of a good goes up or down, you signal there's demand or there's no demand. People, speculating that people know shortages and all that, like the efficiency of the market, because everybody puts information in terms of trading and marketing and all that. And that is basically applied to prediction markets, which I find interesting. Is definitely a little bit more, I would say, complicated to literally figure out. I mean, I could not tell who's gonna win. So I'm not the target group, sort of
It's
betting
funny.
market.
Yeah, it's funny because crypto has such a massive narrative in this election, another like any other election I've ever seen. So it's going to be very interesting how it's going to unfold. So, but I yield.
And it is very interesting from from an objective standpoint, thinking about how much, in my opinion, it actually represents that us in the United States and the majority of the world don't actually even really understand exactly how the voting system in the United States works, right? Because these percentages you get in vet, right, are based off of, just like you said, opinion, which would mean
Yes.
popular vote, which it's not how an elected official like the president gets elected in the United States. It's all based off of the electoral college, and which representatives have been voted into those positions and the choices that they make. Typically, it's said that the popular vote of that state, they elected the elected officials would represent that, but that doesn't, there's nothing in the law that says that has to be. And so it's, yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think, when you think about manipulation of numbers, I think that kind of, plays a role in issuing a less of a resistance for those who would just kind of accept that. And so even if per se that the vote wasn't exactly how it was, maybe numbers get tweaked slightly so that people don't question their elected officials in some representational facts and ways. And so I think that could be something that, from the United States standpoint, going forward, thinking about election interference, and we've already seen plenty of these different kind of examples. I've seen at least already online, and just simple videos that are being posted by people. I think we start talking about maybe like a more representative voting system of the voice of the people, rather than people that have been elected into certain positions in certain districts that then play that larger proceeding role. Daz, you had your hand up, or somebody had their hand up? I thought there.
No, 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 no. I haven't heard from
We
other
haven't heard
people.
Shelley.
Mm.
Yeah, shellfish.
I am politically neutral. This is like the space that I have like
No,
probably the least
th-
amount to contribute to. I'm like
no, and
so
it's
No, no,
not a
no.
politics
Yeah,
person at all.
and it shouldn't be, because, and this is one of the
yeah.
reasons why I didn't put anything specific up top. It's specifically about the sociological ideal of voting, and this way that the societal means of the way we're just demonstrating it in, of course, in Western civilization, because today is the election for the United States, is. And so it's less on your opinion on candidate, because personally I really don't care. It's your choice, and I don't think that it really makes much of a difference. But representing your personal point of view, I think, is very important. And when you think about, even futuristically thinking about, like, instead of a credit score for your value, your monetary value, a social credit score, the participation in society is what represents you, to show, from not having to know you, but the demeanor behind your intent is that you want to be part of society, you want to represent society, you want to see society do great things. And so, voicing your opinion, whatever the opinion may be, super important. But you don't have to voice exactly what it is, now. you could just voice what it is on how it's being done and what your thoughts of are that way. And I'd like to hear that.
I mean, I like the idea of having like a transformer model in a few years to be up for election. I think Elon said that that was possibly going to be by 2030. So I'm just going to sit on my hands until that option is out there because yeah, you know my obsession. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I kind of think like the whole like America's Got Talent and like the phone voting system where people have 24 hours to vote. I think that is something that should be implemented so people don't have to leave their home if things need to be voted on because there's an emergency like a hurricane and they need to get money voted in right away. People can be active participants in some way shape or form and I don't know, I think it was Devon that was talking about this in this space yesterday or the day before and yeah, I just think it would be nice to be able to have a more active count of my vote, not necessarily having to choose one or the other, but like my voice mattering more for like the decisions being made. I hate the party lines that have to be drawn because I feel like it's so spread thin on both sides that they kind of blend together anyway and are still being um, played against each other. So yeah, I wish there was like an America's Got Talent option where I could just vote on stuff and have like GPT go through and explain each thing that I was going to be voting on. If I didn't understand the parameters of what it was being voted on, it could be broken down to like uh fifth grade reading level if I needed it to be or something along that line. So um I hope that's actually an option if that doesn't come up, if maybe they have like language models at the voting booths in the future that'll break down what everybody is voting on and they're just not blindly voting because I think that's what a lot of people do.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I'll give an example actually. There was of course, you may see this in your state if you guys have voted. Typically, on the back of the ballots, you have some sort of propositions. They could be local propositions or state propositions, depending on what's being voted on and it's been, um, I guess, agreed on by your legislators. We had a proposition in New York State, upstate, which simply was to alter a charter of a bill that was passed in 2020, which that was all it had said. It was about altering a bill that had passed in 2020, and it gave you the charter number. Any person who didn't do research on that prior to that vote happening would have absolutely no idea on what they're voting on. And so it's a great example, actually, of where something that could be proven to break down what you're reading without biased language being part of the most important part of it, but without biased language is simply just giving you the actions and steps of what's being performed here. I think that it definitely gives more power to the voters. It doesn't necessarily mean that your vote is in representation of the way that it possibly could be or should be, depending on how you have your point of view on it. I think it's definitely a step in the informed direction, though. That's pretty cool. Chris, welcome up, man. How does it look over in the across the pond over there for how America's doing right now?
Oh, evening to you. Well, to be honest, I'll just be glad when it's over. Then I can get back to having a relatively normal Twitter feed because all I get now is just US election continuously in my feed, and I mean the thing is I'm quite political anyway, but I don't really have any stake really in the what happens in the US election outside of the fact that I think Trump will probably be a better bet for anybody that holds crypto. Outside of that, I really don't know. I don't know enough about any of the policies to really have any kind of opinion on it. Um, but I am quite political, and we've just been through an election in the UK. It's only been about 3 months ago that all happened, and what's remarkable about what I see in the US just seems to be true of elections across the board. is, well, a number of things I believe is that number one, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference who wins because none of them do what they say they're going to do, and they all basically just tell you what you want to hear in order to get your vote. We've just been through that exact same thing in the UK. We now have a new government that came in, promised a whole bunch of different stuff, and within 100 days, they've U-turned and half of it already, broken promises, and it just feels like, you know, there's something fundamentally wrong with how, you know, voting works in general, and it's frustrating to think that really, it's your duty to cast a vote, but it almost seems superfluous sometimes to even bother wasting your time going, because ultimately you still end up with the same, result in the long term anyway. It's just short term changes. Um, and to illustrate that, why I kind of like over the years I've gone from being like dazzling in my 20s, couldn't care less, never voted, wasn't interested, through to when I sort of like got to my 30s, I was a bit more interested and slowly started to take an interest. Now I'm very, very interested in it, but I'm also quite cynical as well in my views of politics. I actually think. Me and Shelley will be best friends on this one, because the day that we just have an AI run the country, and can do it in a benevolent way where, there's genuinely no bias, I think that will be a better world for everyone. But I think we'd be a long time before we see that. But to illustrate my point, uh, my daughter, who is 7, came to me recently and said, that they were having an election in the school for they're doing some kind of like class thing where they have some kind of like board, and they go on some kind of like kids committee for things that they want to do with the school. Anyway, she comes back and she's like, I really wanna win this, blah blah blah. And I just had a chat with her, and I got the feeling that she genuinely wanted this. So I said, okay, if you wanna take part and win, I'll help you. And so um, I paid somebody to make a proper, flashy, professional PowerPoint presentation, rehearsed it with her, and then wrote her essentially a manifesto and promised free ice creams to all the kids on a Friday, afternoon film on a Friday on the last day, and a whole bunch of completely nonsensical stuff that I knew the kids would love, that she was got no chance of ever delivering. And she just went out, delivered this amazing sort of like pitch to all of the people in her class, and won in a landslide. And all she basically did is just went in, told everybody exactly what they wanted to hear, and she got all the votes. And if a 7-year-old can do that, with a little bit of help from her dad, it just goes to show what we're all realistically up against. And frankly, I'm glad our election's over and I haven't got to do it for another 5 years. And I'll be really glad when this one in America's over as well. So yeah, that's my opening gambit. But I'm really interested to hear in what you put about the science of voting. I actually fascinated by that topic, so I'm hoping we're going to get some interesting insights into the actual science behind it.
Definitely, and I think I'm gonna break into the game theory of it prior to the space ending. I'll dig into it for 5 or 10 minutes, just speaking about my own personal philosophical view on how it's been derived the way it has, and of course, there's only certain places in the world that your vote is even cast in any form of representation publicly, and so you know, why is that? And how can we kind of bring everyone under that umbrella? But Larry, you got your hand up, man. Welcome to the space. Please feel free to jump in.
I wanted to add to your statement about upstate New York, that vote. I was voting today with my wife, and she read that that item that you were referring to, it completely confused her. She couldn't understand what they were even asking. And when she did understand what they were asking, she read it herself, having never read it before, and she saw it as push polling because the way they phrased the question would lead you to say yes. And I thought I'd bring up that point about the complexity in the way they ask these questions that you brought up earlier.
Yeah, and more directly to the change of the charter, it actually gives the supervisors, or those who'd be on the board of the county, to actually instill salaries not only within themselves but other positions that they're trying to ask for, like comptroller. It was very in depth, and just like you said, like it was an 8-page document of the changes that they were trying to make. Unless you knew that prior, I mean, you're walking in there and you're just saying, "What is this? I don't understand what I'm looking at." The Shellfish show, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking if you were a registered voter to thwart like voter fraud, would it be possible to have an immutable NFT that went out day of and allowed you access to the voting booth or whatever? Just scan the QR code. Um, and then it wouldn't have the data of like who you were. Like, I mean, it would, but it wouldn't, right? So that way the people that needed to actually go to, I don't know. This is always like something that really like bothers me because like they don't want you to have your identity like out there and stuff like that. But yeah, I feel like it's gonna have to be done in some way, shape, or form, right? To like thwart the voter fraud stuff, like the people going out multiple ways. Even if you have like the phone method of like the America's Got Talent voting, you still have to have some kind of identification in your phone linked to you. So you'd have to have your digital twin or something long term, right? Like you couldn't, or do you think there's still going to be fraud even with that, even if we go on the blockchain?
I think when there's a will, there will always be a way. However, do question, paper ballots to digital authentication, and NFTs are great, and I do think, like, from a futuristic standpoint, I think that, to me, like something like a ZK roll up where you have, your DID in the same wallet that has the NFT that gives you that one-time registration of vote, and so you can sign into the application, give your vote. But then there's a lot of questions on how that account is exactly associated with you and only you, and how there's no manipulation behind that, like somebody didn't whack you in the back of the head and then take your phone and then kind of cast your vote for you. So there's definitely benefits to both. There's Today we do a lot of mail-in ballots, which I think is probably one of the most confusing parts of being able to cast a vote in a paper ballot system, especially in a state where you don't require any identification. It's like, what do I could just essentially just print as much ballots as I want and just put random people's names on them, I guess, and then I don't know how that necessarily makes any sense, but some states, are different than others. Yeah, I mean, I like it, right? I just think there's an authentication verification factor that isn't yet available in our society. There isn't a government application or a state application where you can, say that you can verify without reasonable doubt that that device is yours and that you behind it on the other end that's casting the vote, that with that single NFT and representation of like your social security. But it's cool though. Dazzling, go ahead, man.
I guess the question is, how could you utilize the technology that we are all very familiar with to assist with the voting process, right? So you've got this ledger, and then you have now digital IDs. You can have, NFTs that people can store or to use, as Shellfish had mentioned, even dynamic NFTs to change the state of the vote. And then you've got also price oracles to kind of bring in that real time data as the votes are being cast. So I guess the question here is, how can this technology make the voting better? And from what I can see, there are all the features there to be able to make all these things happen. It's just it just seems a little while off to be actually getting there. And I know that people are very have very actively been trying to solve the voting problem with the blockchain for quite a while. I'm not actually sure where that is at the moment, where that development is at. But yeah, it is something that seems like the technology's there that could kind of fix a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I think one of the largest things that's holding the for that to even be a possibility back is really, in at least Western civilization, would be government and municipalities, your local, even your locals, um, or because unless that all that representation is equally interoperable through the systems, through the networks and applications, you have a broken voting system, and you can't do that digitally. And of course, the government wouldn't agree upon that. For whatever capacity I would be able to seek, Congress voting on something like that, which plays another role into it, right? Who is in Congress? Well, they're typically 60 plus, and so all of these people have not really had the advantages of growing up with the exact type of technologies that maybe we're using on a daily basis. And so, the possibilities sound more scary to them. This may be still possible, but still just more fear based. And that could be like a progressional time thing. Depends, of course. There's things like revolutions, and revolutions are always epochs in time where large technological advancements typically take place because there's much less regulation, which kind of is what usually dampers the ability for technical innovation to take place. It's usually not even finance; it's just really. But Chris, go ahead, jump in, man.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the 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 issue of voting can be resolved. Blockchain is just it's tailor made. I mean, blockchain is put like this: the, the many people talk about blockchain projects in so it's the solution in search of a problem. Well, voting is one of those problems out there where blockchain is a genuinely good solution. It provides properties that are just far superior to other digital systems. And I mean, Dennis and I have already sort of like scoped out how we would handle building a voting system using XRPL tech. We wouldn't do it on the mainnet. It's not a practical application, but the XRPL would be perfect. But ultimately, the tech is not the problem here. You still have to have um, that that central authority behind it issuing essentially the equivalent of that piece of paper. In the UK, you have to register to vote, okay, and that's based on where you live. And so you have a voting card come through the post, and then you have to take it down to a physical location on the day, and you stick your X in the box, and you stick it in a sealed box, and you hope that it makes its way to the station untampered with, and then they get counted up, and that's how it's done in the UK. And they cast tens of millions of votes, and the results are usually, the first results are usually in within a matter of 3 or 4 hours of the closing of the polls. Um, and it does seem to work quite well. However, you do have to wonder how many votes do get cast, uh, where those bits of paper get intercepted, or perhaps the person doesn't live there anymore, but they're still registered, and someone else goes and uses it. There's a whole raft of question marks around it, and I just think that blockchain is an obvious solution. So given that blockchain provides a technical solution to this problem, and given that blockchain is not new now, we're talking over a decade old now, um, the question is, why is it actually not being more seriously considered as a potential long-term solution? Because you wouldn't have to leave your house. You would be able to do it within sort of like a 24-hour period, and you would have the results instantly. You wouldn't have to wait, a week to find out how a couple of states have, not managed to get their machines working in time like you were talking about. You'd have the answer within a minute or two of the actual closing of the poll. It's an all-round better system. So the question really to ask is, why is it not being looked at? And there's probably a deeper reason as to why, because I don't think technically that there's any reason why it shouldn't. Um, I certainly believe that there's a number of ways you could do it, and it would work better than the current system. But no one seems to really be leading the way in doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Nobody seems to be leading the way in doing it, and if you are right, going back to regulation, you seem to be covered in red tape in most cases, trying to promote those types of text to be used in this way, and
It's true.
you know
Yeah. I built
could
one,
be
I built a voting system years ago. I'm trying to think now, actually, blockchain did exist at the time, but we were really early days. So this is like around 2012, 14. I built a voting system for um, an organization, and we were casting about 25,000 votes. It worked perfectly well, right? And we had the answers instantly. You know, everything you needed to know was right there to call up. It was all in a SQL database. But the fundamental problem was, how does anybody trust that I, as the developer, didn't just go in and just change a few things? Now we did try and implement various security in the design of it to sort of like give assurances that that wasn't going to happen. But the bottom line is that when it's centrally controlled, there's always a way if you're so desired, and that's the one thing where blockchain will always win out. If it's designed architecturally correctly, then you can't fudge it. Okay, so as long as the issuance of the voter right is done correctly, you can't fudge it. I just can't understand why nobody is really digging into this. It's such an obvious application for blockchain.
it's very interesting. And FOMO, you got your hand up, and welcome to the space, man. We'll jump over to you and then back over to Larry.
Thanks, Death Ranger. I think I'm following what Chris is trying to put down, but I will bring up the alternative of in the XRPL, we have a very serious issue, I would say, with regards to voting. Um, it's still politicized quite a lot throughout our community. There's still a lot of friction there. It's not perfect. It could be improved, etc., etc. Um, I think that's a very obvious reason why the tech isn't quite there. I understand with all the different amendments and so forth that have come forward, and probably I don't even know if you could really use those with regards to amendment voting, but the issues that exist over there would kind of roll over into the real world of trying to implement something in the voting system as well. Like even we don't even know if a validator is voted no in many instances, right? Just because of the way that voting system was implemented. Um, uh, so yeah, I see a lot of what I mean. There's many people out there that see the benefit of what blockchain could bring towards voting, but I don't think anyone has plowed enough time into it because I don't think the tech is quite there yet. I mean, there's still too many issues along the way to get this all lined up. Um, so if we could implement something better in our ecosystem, specifically around that amendment voting or just the voting in general around whatever we do on the ledger itself, whether it be raising the fees or maybe restricting transactions or who knows, whatever we want to put our mind to, right? Um, if we could implement that better, it would be a better showcase to actually something in the real world. But from what's there and what's been shown to date, I think we've been a worse place.
It's a really interesting point as well, FOMO, and you know, it could be said that like maybe that's why some regulators, you know, so much red tape, and that at the same time, maybe we would have already gotten to that point where we could have developed a system and put it together if there was more incentive and emphasis on building that type of system. So I think like you know, to look at it from both sides there, but it is an excellent point nonetheless. Um, Larry, though, man, go please feel free to jump in there, and we'll go back over to you, Chris, after.
Yeah, just to touch one point, one benefit for me of in-person voting is that you have a public attestation of who you are, and then you have a public, safe place to cast your own vote that you wouldn't have if you did it out of your house, because who knows what motivated you to vote one way or another. My point is illustrated by Carmela's last ad, where she showed the lumberjack going in with his MAGA friends, but once he gets into the booth, he votes for Carmela. So I think that's an important component to public voting. I'm not saying it's applicable for something like XRPL governance, but for political, I think it's a very valuable component. And until mail-in ballots got um, projected, those were limited to the infirmed and overseas military.
And
Explain it.
that's such a great one that you brought up too, right? Military. Those who are overseas only have one method of voting, and that would be by sending in mail-in ballots. Other than that, they don't even get had to voice their opinion in the election. And that's you know, thinking about blockchain or even just a digital system. I mean, the government could have made a digital app that was specifically only for, you know, U.S. Service members that were overseas, and yeah, even something like that has not been done. It's a great point, Larry. Chris, please feel free to jump in, man.
I was gonna just touch on FOMO's point about the tech, because I mean, when I'm talking about voting, I think I'm talking about it in the context of um, the political arena, in particular, what's going on in America today, but more widely, just general voting for a government. Um, but the thing is that is a ultimately it's a centralized system, right? We are ultimately living that centralized the world. We are essentially in order to make a voting system work, you are requiring that central authority to confirm that you are uh, eligible to vote. And if you can solve that part of the equation, right, in an ability to reliably give one vote per person to everybody that is eligible in a centralized manner, then the decentralized nature of blockchain pairs perfectly with that, and you have, in my opinion, a workable solution. Where you were talking about, like, you know, you trying to do something with voting in the XRPL, I would agree with you. I think that the tech is not realistically at a point where it would work, because it's not centralized, it's a decentralized system, and a decentralized solution is not going to be as easy because you just don't have that central authority. It's a much more complicated um, solution, I think. So I agree with you that we're not there yet at a point where we could, you know, reliably do it. That said, if you put it in the context of a DAO, where you have to essentially be a member, you then reintroduce that sort of centralized authority that is able to then authenticate you as being eligible to vote, issue you with that, and that does provide sort of like that middle ground. Um, Not quite sure if I've made the point I wanted to make, but yeah, I know you got your hand up, so go for it.
Yeah, so um, an exact example of what you were just trying to describe over there is token issuance. And if we could reliably find a way to issue a new token, for instance, create a new token and only give one person one token, you've then solved exactly that issue. But we haven't got there. We've never seen anything like that. And we see what happens in the market when someone comes in and grabs a whole bunch of it, right? Or someone tries to even distribute it freely themselves, or someone tries to do some token gating via an NFT. All of the kind of permutations that people kind of speak about, we've seen kind of play out in the blockchain world. And there hasn't been anything that's really come forward to do that successfully. Yes, maybe DRD changes this over the next while. But again, we need time to see if that works or fails, or and how it can be broken down. And I think once that trust is there, then yes, I think, yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit after that, right? Once you solve that initial issue. But right now, well, I think it's too risky for anyone to kind of implement something like this.
It's how
Yeah,
you
that's right. Right.
achieve it, right? It's how you achieve that eligibility and issuing of that single vote to a single person. Once you solve that problem, right, the, everything else is relatively straightforward to actually implement. That's the difficult part. But I think in things like government elections, it's an easier solve. Although it's obviously a humongous task because you're talking about millions of people, it's actually a relatively straightforward solution because I mean in the UK everybody has a national insurance number. I mean I don't know whether you have something similar in the States, but we all have a unique number, right? And that's issued by a government department. We also have birth certificates. We also have driving licenses. We have passports. We're already used to having various forms of identity. In an ideal world, what we would do is you move to a scenario where there's one form of identity issued at birth, and that's your identity for life, and that's your identity for everything, and then you don't have to have all these different forms. Everything links off that one singular record. And then if you have that, that just resolves all of the issues around voting, and a ton of other major enhancements to the way we live. However, with that then becomes a massive um, trade-off over your sort of like your privacy, because now every single thing can be tracked to you, and then you open up a whole different debate. But yeah, when we solve that
I
problem,
think the privacy on your on what you're trying to highlight there kind of is solved because the physical or the document doesn't necessarily have to be held and forever there. The attestation can, I mean, you don't have to reveal the full identity of the person for the attestation to work for a DID. But nevertheless, I think the ID gets us a whole lot closer there, but it does, for instance, open up another issue. If you look at, and I think it's been one of the issues that's been raised quite a lot recently in the US with the current elections, is a lot of immigrants can't afford what do you call it, identification. So those, as I understand, those states don't require people to vote with their ID, with their identification numbers, because of that issue specifically.
At least that was some of the reasoning behind it. Yeah, yep, and that's definitely something that would need to be addressed because everyone would essentially need an assigned account, right? That they would be able to be proof of that that's their vote. I think I'd like to see, and I think you guys are both pretty much on the money. I'd like to see like the mixture, kind of the combination of your vote being as potent as you would think about it, as like somebody on the UNL casting their vote, right? But with all of those kind of protections involved, nobody knows necessarily who's behind somebody who's running a validator, right? But it should be the exact same for somebody who's casting a vote, and of course it is today, right? You can only see, if you know somebody's identification information, you can look up to see that they did or did not vote, but you don't know who they voted for, right? And so you can only see that they participated in a vote. um, this is why also I think that it really only happens at this type of system where your voice is able to be heard in this manner only happens really if there's a government agency that kind of steps in. Maybe the issuer of the what was it you said, EIN there, Chris, or the social security numbers, right? The issuer
Yeah.
of that, the verifier of your credentials that exist on chain, which holds the NFT, which allows you to do that singular vote or token or IOU, whichever is issued, that allows you to do that singular vote and representation. But still, FOMO, I really like that point that you brought up, because who says that someone's not standing behind Shellfish in her house, holding a knife to her and saying, you're going to vote right now this way, right? And so, man, from a being in person standpoint, Larry, this is exactly where I really like that thought, because you're representing yourself in public, that you're safe, that nobody's going to know exactly what your decision is also in the end of the day.
Can I think if people are open to accepting mail-in ballots today, that 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 kind of issue I think is more acceptable. Moving to something digital, but the payment of identification and having some form of identity needs to be figured out, specifically for those kind of people that are not able to get some form of identity, be that through monetary issues or whatever that is, whatever the situation is. Uh, and yeah, I mean that making sure that one person is getting one vote is kind of the biggest thing. Once that hurdle kind of is overcome, I think you see floodgates open for people using this tech.
It's an interesting point, and I think we're going to see it in our lifetimes. I think we'll see it in the next 2 decades, of course, because the presidential elections, at least in the United States, every 4 years, 5 years in the UK. So, guys, we got a couple more years before we have to worry about it again. But maybe not next election, but next election, I could see that if we're still technologically progressing the exact same way we are from a globalist standpoint, that we're able to enact this, and on a grander scale, start to potentially then realize and think about from a sociological point of not only a country, United States, Mexico, you have the United Kingdom, of course, there's many countries inside there. The the thought that borders only exist in representations of our minds, and when thinking about making choices, voting, right, the science of decision making, one direction or another, the potentials, I think it starts to really, really make a lot of sense when our species starts looking at things less from a divisional standpoint and more from a communal standpoint, especially if you start thinking about automation and robotics beginning to replace the majority of labor jobs that will exist all throughout the world. And systems like this is really, from a digital standpoint, the transformational standpoint, interoperable and connectivity standpoint, I think is what is going to allow us to be that full communal world, that species that I hope, of course, I want to see, and I think so many people in this space want to see, hopefully. And I really loved that you brought up an idea on why mailing ballots are so important right now, FOMO, because from accepting a digital standpoint, the thought that you could already send in, right? What's not much of a difference between sending a letter in the mail and clicking a button and sending the transaction through a digital circumference, right? The digital network. The the interesting compatibility there, I think, is just another part of the game theory, and where we've had this progressional step from emperors to kings and queens to rulers and to parties, which you enacted democracies and communism and socialism and all these different terms that we kind of try and use to describe the intent behind the political party at large for the decision making of that entity country. And we start to get to this this progression now where, you know, in Western civilization, we have the voice being heard, but not necessarily represented. And, you know, going back to like the founding fathers of the United States, the intent behind what was called the Constitution and you know, enacting all of these laws and country and ability to sustain vote. And I really think it's all for this moment that we're in, this point that we're finally getting to, where we'll be able to have a communal network of decision makers from a global standpoint, and possibly, you know, maybe farther out than global in the long term. And it's you know, it's a must, it's a need, because without the voices of us in society, who directs the communal direction? It's only the voices of the few, and the voices of the few in this particular instance being less than the 1% of the population, not looking out for the best interest of the rest of the population typically. Because how why would you, is really the biggest question. I mean, you have to worry about yourself and your survival, and of course the type of society we have built today, the societal means of power can easily be justified by ease of survival. And I think the changing of society and the communal means of representation uh, today, starting, is very important. And yeah, that's my own little philosophical view on why voting is so important, and representing yourself is so important. Shellfish, please jump in, though I've spoken a lot.
I was just, I actually just asked your favorite LLM model, um, if we had gone to blockchain, how much it would actually save, and it guesstimated between 30 and 50%, which it was saying the elections cost about $14 billion. I didn't realize that. I guess that's aside from donations, because of staffing, printing. Voting stations, just all these different things that factor into it. So that would, I mean, that's a substantial amount of money that could be saved in the budget alone. That's huge. So I hope if the Doge starts looking into things, that is something that they contribute to the overhaul, because that's those are pretty big numbers.
The Doge.
The Department of Government Efficiency. Did you not hear this acronym yet?
Oh, I have.
I think it's the DOJ or something that you're referring to, but I'm not too familiar with
No,
the.
no, she's referring to an agency that does not yet exist, possibly. Something Elon Musk had mentioned. This has been a great conversation, though, so far, and I'm probably going to close it up in the next 4 to 5 minutes. I actually only meant to do like a 30-40 minute conversation today, but there's a lot of great conversation, a lot of great ideals on how to make, you know, voting more of a representational system and easier to access. And then even, you know, talking about why we vote and why it's so important to represent yourself. Any last minute thoughts from anybody on the speaker panel, or anybody who wants to come up real quick and share any ideals or questions?
I think I'd just say that it seems as though the technology is not perfect, but fairly sound into fixing a lot of these issues. However, the biggest problem, as what was mentioned, is the basically the boomers that don't really want to see change. So if we want to see change, guess who it's going to be up to? Us. Okay, so if whether you like it or not, if you want to see that change, you're probably going to have to get into politics. So I would say a lot of the things that we do in this industry, in the blockchain space, is kind of priming us for that role. So if you are interested, I would strongly advise you get into politics and make that change if you want to see the world change. And let's kick these booms to the side. They've had their run. It's our turn now.
That's right. All change comes from within. And for all of those who are in California, if you guys see a missile tonight in the air, don't be alarmed. There's going to be a Minuteman 3 that's launched from California, which is a hypersonic nuclear missile. It's just a simple test going on. Of course, the day of the election, nonetheless.
Not the best day for it at all, dude.
Oh, it's quite a comical world that we live in here. But it was a great conversation. I do love all of you guys. I hope everyone has a great rest of the night. I'm not sure if we'll be back on Thursday of this week. But either way, hope everyone stays safe, enjoys the rest of tonight, and look forward to seeing you guys in the future and having more great conversations. So, love you guys. Night, everyone.
Night, guys.